Kevin showed up.
Yeah, we got cucks on deck. This is gonna be wild.
All right. Feel free. So, Kevin, you're familiar with JF and his views.
Mm-hmm.
All
Yeah,
right.
I've seen
So,
some of the videos and seen Twitter activity and all that. So,
okay, tell him why he's wrong about ethno states and race realism. Go ahead.
yeah. So, really, what it comes down to is what we know about biology, which you described to some extent, and I think there's some subtle bait and switches that you do that a lot of race realists and HBD people do, where you will replace a very benign version of population genetics that everyone will agree on and slip it into this view that's used to justify ethno-states and discrimination and oppression in a way that isn't really validated by the actual empirical facts that we can extract from biology. And I think if you look historically, arguments for ethno-states have followed this similar pattern where race is sort of used as this scapegoat or used as this concept that justifies people's eagerness to attain an ethno-state.
So you said that I was using concepts that everyone agree on to justify oppression. When did you ever hear me advocate for any sort of oppression?
No, so sorry, that's my fault on sentence structure. You're using concepts that everyone agrees on. Those concepts are used to justify those things. So for example, there's no way for an ethno-state to not be in some sense oppressive or exclusionary to certain kinds of people. It's the concept of an ethno-state. There is members based off of these genetic parameters.
So are you against the idea of a state controlling its immigration and therefore being exclusionary by definition?
Yes.
So you are for open borders?
I think that the ideas of open borders are something that is should be strived for. I will also contend against ethno-states on sort of more traditional grounds where maybe we have some level of immigration because there are tangible factors in the world that we need to take into account for immigration. I don't think you need to be for open borders to be against an ethno-state.
Like what are the factors that you would take into account to justify a controlled immigration?
Well, so if we have a nation state that needs borders, then there's obviously going to be different factors of space and resources that need to be allotted based off of just criteria that the government decides on.
So, for example, if 40 million sub-Saharan African went to move today to your village or whatever town you live in, would you be okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely. There are actually African immigrants around the corner from me.
40 million?
So essentially 40 million?
40 million? Well,
yeah.
I think that's a silly example because you can't have 40 million people of anywhere go into a single village. So why would you start off with this kind of absurd hyperbole that you know is going to get a negative answer when it could just be, how would you feel if immigrants moved in?
Okay, well, you're advocating essentially for a system of government that allows military invasions without even making a proper response. You're essentially saying everyone is welcome on my land as long as they can buy the plane tickets. I will not have any opposition to their entry.
So where exactly did that justify military invasion without response? Because there can be military responses for even intra-state conflicts.
Because the open border policy that you're advocating for is essentially letting people win the war even before they even have to engage with you. They will just buy a plane ticket and they will invade your country. Do you recognize that there's a need for countries to maintain their democratic structure in the current state or in any state, that there is a need to protect the country from outside forces moving into the country and dominating it physically and outbreeding the people that live there?
No, I don't think that that is really a given in any sense. And I don't think that that's even within the framework of what people typically think about with war. There have been multiple migratory waves that have happened throughout history. They have not been viewed as some sort of mass extinction. So I'm
I don't
struggling to
care
understand
about
the way
how
you're
other
portraying it.
people view it. I don't care about how other people view it. If people get replaced, it is a mass extinction, whether you want to call it that way or not. People who think like you and who act upon policies of the kind that you suggest here will eventually get replaced by other people who don't think like you. People who think that defending their territory, their nation state is important, and protecting the existence of their line of descent is something important. You advocate for endless migration waves. As long as your country is interesting to people outside, you will leave open borders and you'll get replaced by people who don't believe the same things as you, by the way, and who eventually will form a nation state where your descendants could have lived, but they won't because they will be outbred.
So explain to me why that's a bad thing. Everything we have around us now is built upon the very things that you're trying to eschew as being bad. The entire history of humanity is based off of migrations and gene flow and cultures constantly transforming because cultures aren't static. They're not outside of time. What I believe now, I don't want to be what people believe in the future because what people believed 200 years ago, I'm happy we don't believe now.
Well, you're saying that the history of humanity is a constant wave of immigration. To the contrary, the history of humanity is the convergence toward nation states that protect their border. There is no nation state that has survived with open border immigration policies except the worst shitholes on this planet, because no one wants to get there anyway.
But what you're ignoring is that what we have now is built off of those past cultures. There's nothing saying that the way that the West exists now needs to be for humanity to prosper and to succeed. Rome fell, and we were able to build something else, and that was totally fine. The British people, the British ethnicity as it exists today, is the result of a massive migratory wave and a wipeout that isn't the original British people on the British Isles. White skin is not inherent to white people, to European populations. It was brought in from Asia. Without Asian integration, there wouldn't be white skin, and you know this.
Everyone is a migrant at some point. You can always go back to the past and find a moment at which a land was colonized or replaced by new people. I mean, that doesn't matter. The question today that we're facing is there are people outside Western civilization. They want to get in. Is there an interest? Do you have any scientific evidence that we gain in opening the borders to whoever wants to enter?
I'm not really. So would you mind rephrasing that? I'm a little bit like, do you just want a scientist? So I'll ask one thing first. What would you want scientific evidence to look like when this is sort of something that cannot be justified through normal empirical investigation? We can't run replications of the universe where open borders occur. We can't really do observational science, controlling for all confounding factors between localities and time and space. What are you looking for, and what do you think is evidence for the contrary?
It's quite simple. I'm asking you, on what evidence do you base your project of creating infinite waves of genetic replacement in Western civilization? And you claim that this future project, which you admit has never been tried before, and you admit we cannot do experiment about this, what kind of evidence do you base yourself on to believe that this will improve Western civilization?
I don't know whether or not my intention is actually to improve Western civilization as it exists currently.
So your goal is to replace Western civilization with something else, and there's not even an end goal to it. There's not even something you want to obtain. You just want to replace genes for fun in North America and Europe. What's your goal with
my
this
goal is
border
for,
policy?
Freedom of movement, freedom of expression, freedom of activity of people around the world.
Have you ever considered the possibility that letting people free to outbreed and replace you may not be a good thing for your line of descent, for the line of descent of people who have started these countries, and that at some point you may invite people in who will reduce the state of liberty in Western civilization, and your initial action, which was aimed at freedom of movement, may actually reduce and question the state of liberty in Western civilizations?
I do not understand how you get that conclusion. So even Western culture as it exists now is not the same as it was at its origin. There have been changes in gene frequencies and changes in population demographics. All of these things have happened, and yet Western civilization, if anything, has improved along these lines that several people laud as the best time to be alive, or a time that's radically improving. So what
are the improvements that were caused by immigration within the last 30 years?
I'm sorry, what was?
What are the improvements to Western civilization that have been induced by immigration for the last 30 years?
You can point to just about every major tech company in the United States right now, and there's founders who are immigrants. There's researchers working on basic work in those areas that were immigrants. So there's no trade-off between this idea of people who shouldn't be allowed to in the ethno state and people who can contribute to the things that we enjoy and benefit from.
So do you think that if Canada was to convert to an immigration policy that would lead to the entry of migrants to the point where in a few decades or in a few hundred years, we would have a 60% or 80% Muslim population? Do you think that the state of liberty in Canada and the state of the democracy of Canada could be affected by an 80% Muslim majority?
So I'm going to ask you to clarify, because you could have the exact same demographics Canada currently has and have it be 80% Muslim. So what are you really trying to say with this question?
What I'm trying to say is there a point at which your open border policy will lead to a reduction of the things that we consider positive in Western civilization, such as individual liberty? Do you think that Canada could be turned into a theocracy if there were 80% Muslims in it?
I do not think it would be a given that Canada would become a theocracy if there are 80% Muslims.
Do you think that it would reduce the state of civil liberties, individual liberties? Do you think that Canada would be significantly changed by an 80% Muslim population?
Not necessarily. You would have to see exactly how it turned out. So if you look at a recent Pew study based off of tolerance and values of Islamic populations in the United States, they were more accepting than evangelical populations. So just going off of religion and preconceived notions about populations isn't a way to go about predicting the future, because as people integrate into cultures, as they change cultures, and as cultures move through time, values and ideas and behavior changes also.
So why is your criteria accepting of others when my criteria I asked for is the state of liberty, the respect of civil individual liberties, such as the one we have in Western civilization? First, what you said there is bullshit. At least in the UK, we have very good surveys indicating that the Muslim populations that immigrate, they are bigoted in some ways. For example, there's much more anti-Semitism in a Muslim immigrant in the UK than in the average population. So I will say I don't believe your call there, but it's not even the question. The question is, I ask you, do you think that the 80% Muslim population will lead to different effects on Canada? And your answer is, we don't know. Everything can happen. Well, I'm not going to bet the safety of my country and the free, the capacity of my people and my descendants to decide of the fate of their own country based on a guy on the internet who tells me maybe it could be good. You don't have any proof. You don't bring any facts that indicate that these migrants can bring a positive shift to my society. So there's no reason for me to believe in immigration based on what you say. At best, what I can hope based on the facts you just proposed is that they might be able to work in companies. I'm not interested in this. We can work in companies very well.
Well, that's an absolute simplification of what I said. I'm going to make two claims. The first is that what I offered was not simply working at companies. It was innovative companies that have led the charge of the new internet-based online technological economy that we benefit from. The other thing that I want to push is that you're arguing against something that you say might work. Now, I think that historically we can really get a grasp that there really won't be a major issue. We had similar issues with Catholics coming in from Italy, and there was a papist scare, and that subsided. We have evidence that right now Muslim populations in the United States are actually upholding the values that we say that we want more than evangelical populations. What I want to ask is that when we have a little bit of evidence that this could actually work, and we have historical evidence that as cultures come in, there is eventual integration, why would we go for ethno-states which have a more sordid historical past? If you look at Nazi Germany, if you look at the behavior of colonizers of the United States and moving out and constricting native populations in South and North America, why would we take our chances on something that has empirically gone bad and hope that it works better without any indication that it would?
Oh, I'm not trying to convince anyone of wanting an ethno-state. I would start an ethno-state. I've always said it. I would start an ethno-state with people who agree on maintaining a state of liberty and pursuing this state of liberty. And what I indicate, I wouldn't be interested in you getting in my ethno-state, for example.
That goes back to a question I had for you, JF. So have you always felt this way? Because you were not. I didn't hear you speak about it publicly until, just recently.
Yeah, the thing is, I've always been a Quebecois separatist. So I was a nationalist way before the alt-right even existed. Now, the alt-right, I joined it as a kind of remote observer of it. I'm sympathetic to it. But the alt-right is more racially based. I am a nationalist in Quebec, and in Quebec, our nationalism is not racially based. That being said, when I look at the situation in the US, it's clear that an ethno-state seems like a good solution for anyone who likes liberty, because the fact that we are stuck in right now in the US is that we are invading on personal liberties more than we ever did. We have literal systems of justice aimed at finding white men systematically guilty of abuse and the complete absence of evidence. We use this system to kidnap young children and put them in the hand of their mothers by assuming that the male is an abuser and by emitting domestic violence protection orders that are based on completely no evidence. We find people guilty, we violate the presumption of innocence, and this state of things has been brought through an increasingly leftist direction from the voter base. A big part of it coming from minorities who have been shown again and again to vote our country toward the left, to transform this country from what it was, which was a country of liberty, down to the current state, which is a country of invasions of private rights, for simply letting the state control more and more of our reproductive and private rights. You ask why an ethno-state? Because the ethno-state is the only place where I can rethink that society, because in the current democratic oppressive system, there is no way we can get out of the current invasions of private liberties in the US.
Are these ideas that you picked up after the state and got involved with your personal relationship and told you couldn't, or did you hold these prior to that? Told you couldn't?
He said he said he was a Quebec separatist, and they've had a few elections as to whether or not they would secede from Canada and become their own country.
Okay. What's a JF ethno-state look like? Is it like a white ethno-state? Is it what is your ideal end game here?
Yeah, so just to answer your first question that you asked, I was pro-father's right before I even had children. And before I got involved in the court system, I knew that the court system was that way because I've done research on the question and I've seen it in my personal life. I just saw what I was researching on for 10 years before. So we currently live in a what I call the homonormative matriarchy, which is a system that kidnaps children from fathers by assuming that they are incompetent to be fathers. So the first thing you ask me what my ethno-state looks like and why am I for the ethno-state? It's because right now the alt-right is the only movement in this entire political system of the US where we are allowed to dream of a new society. Why are we? Because we we abandon the idea of respecting everyone, including everyone, and we say we're going to make a group with people who want that kind of society, who want to advance the state of liberty. So the first thing that my ethno-state looks like is a state of liberty, a state where there is a constitution, there is a constitution that's respected in all courts of the country, including family courts. So, because in the US, you have a good legal system in criminal courts, you have a good First Amendment, but the First Amendment is protected in situations where, okay, we won't put you in jail for what you say, but we're gonna take your kid, we're gonna make your life impossible to live. So the first thing I would say from the ethno-state is protect the white family. Now, am I open to minorities in the ethno-state? Absolutely. I don't have any problem with minorities as long as we can ensure that the people who join that state are willing to not vote away from the constitution, not vote our liberties away in exchange of a state controlled of private lives.
Would there be limits on procreation for minorities?
No, I believe that a state that would impose any sort of interference to reproductive liberties, I would not stand by it. Okay. I would stand strongly against it. In fact, if the ethno-state was to build itself, say, on a couple of states in the US, let's say 3 or 4 northern states just separating from the US, I say the minorities who are in there should be staying if they want. They should not have their rights impeded upon. We should respect it, but we should make sure that we shape this society so that the vote of these minorities cannot interfere with our ability to dispose of our own liberties, dispose of our own money, and do what we want, including leading a white family lifestyle.